Blonde girl screamed when black doctor touched her dad. 15 minutes later, she was crying in his arms. What happens when a respected black surgeon saves a life, only to be treated like a threat for doing his job? You won't believe how his quiet defiance turns into a lesson that shakes an entire hospital to its core. What followed didn't just change minds, it changed the system. Dr. James Lawson didn't believe in miracles. He believed in numbers, unflinching, stubborn numbers. He trusted the downward slope of a fever chart, the rhythm of a healthy heartbeat echoing through a monitor, the cold certainty of a biopsy result. But above all that, beneath all the white coats and Ivy League diplomas, there was something deeper, something older than any textbook or protocol. It was his mother's voice, whispering through the years. Son, you gotta be twice as good just to get half the respect. And he listened. Lord, did he listen. He studied longer, worked harder, and held his head higher, because that was the only way the system would even glance in his direction without suspicion. So when he walked out of the OR that morning, 3.5 hours under the microscope, dissecting a fragile vessel inside the brain of a man, one wrong move away from permanent silence, it wasn't with triumph or arrogance. It was with that familiar blend of satisfaction and quiet exhaustion. His gloves were still dusted with invisible echoes of adrenaline, and his breath tasted of latex and sterilized air. The patient? A retired colonel, white, wealthy, military resume so polished it probably shined in the dark. The kind of man whose name moved hospital administrators to personally check on his care. The kind of man with an expensive lawyer and a family portrait in a country club newsletter. But James didn't care about that. He cared about the ruptured artery, and he fixed it. As he stood in the hallway, peeling off his surgical mask and blinking away the fluorescent haze, the anesthesiologist, a tan-skinned guy named Rick, was already cracking jokes about golf swings and overpriced steaks. Life resumed, for them anyway. But James wasn't done. No, sir. Something told him to do what wasn't required, to go the extra yard, not out of ego, but out of something deeper, human decency. The desire to tell the family face to face that their world wasn't about to crumble. So against protocol, against convenience, against the quiet voice in his head whispering, "Let it be," he walked to the room. No nurse, no intern, just him, the man who held life in his hands. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that hums like a warning. The patient lay unconscious, machines tracking the gentle rise and fall of a chest no longer under siege. And there by the window was a girl, blonde hair in a perfect ribbon, legs swinging just above the floor, eyes sharp like broken glass. She was maybe 7, old enough to memorize Disney songs, too young to know what bias feels like, or so he hoped. James walked in, voice low, gentle. "Good afternoon," he said, approaching with the slow rhythm of someone used to breaking bad news in soft tones. "Your dad had a very serious surgery, but it went well. He's going to be okay." He reached out, not to her, but to her father. Just a hand on the shoulder, a professional gesture, reassurance, connection. And then it happened. The scream. Sharp, piercing, unfiltered fear in its purest form. "Don't touch him!" she shrieked, stumbling backward, eyes wide with terror, mouth stretched in horror. She wasn't looking at a doctor. She was looking at a monster, a threat, a danger. To her, that moment wasn't about medicine. It was about fear of what his skin meant, what it represented. That dark brown hand on her white father's body. That image, loaded, historic, weaponized. The door flung open with the kind of urgency usually reserved for code blues. A nurse rushed in, followed by a security guard whose hand was already drifting near his belt. Not a gun, but still a threat, still a presence. "What's going on here?" the guard barked, his voice echoing off sterile walls. James stood frozen, not because he was unsure of himself, but because he already knew how this played out. He'd seen this movie before, and the ending never changed. The black man explains. The white folks investigate. And somewhere in the mix, justice goes out for coffee and never comes back. "I'm his doctor," James said, slow and measured. "I performed the surgery." The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stared at him like he was lying. Like maybe James broke in here to finish a job he never started. Meanwhile, the nurse was already ushering the little girl out, soothing her with soft coos, never once turning to ask what exactly she'd screamed about. Then the mother appeared, blonde, designer coat, high heels clicking like accusations on the tile floor. Her face paled the moment she locked eyes with James. "Is everything... What happened?" she asked, scanning the room like there'd been a break-in. James didn't bother answering. What was the point? They'd already drawn the conclusions. Then came the soft, practiced voice of Dr. Houston, head of the department. "James," as she said, appearing like a scene cue, "can we speak privately?" Of course, they always wanted to speak privately when things got uncomfortable, because racism, when it's cloaked in professionalism, demands discretion. They led him to a conference room that smelled of old coffee and even older politics. No one offered him a drink. No one asked if he was okay. "James," Houston said, folding her hands like she was about to read scripture, "you know we have a protocol in cases like this. We have to—" "Suspend me?" he interrupted, his voice ice-wrapped steel. She hesitated. "It's temporary, until we investigate. The girl's mother filed a complaint." He stared at her like she was speaking another language. "Because I walked in to check on my patient? Because I laid a hand, one damn hand, on a man I just saved? She said your presence caused a panic response in her daughter?" "A panic response," James repeated. "How clinical. How convenient." Dr. Houston lowered her eyes. She couldn't answer because the answer was written all over the room. They were scared, not of him, but of her, of the mother, of the image of a white girl screaming at a black man. That's all it took, and that's all it ever took. "You gonna investigate her fear?" he asked, rising from his seat. "Or just mine?" No answer. He left the room not in shame, but in something hotter, something older. A fire passed down from generations of men like him, qualified, brilliant, necessary, but always one wrong move away from being a problem. He found his way to the locker room, pulled off his white coat, looked into the mirror. His reflection stared back, tired, furious, righteous. "I saved his life," he whispered, "and they're scared of my hands." He laughed, not the kind of laugh that ends in joy, the kind that cracks through the ribs when you've got nothing left but the truth. And the truth? The truth was loud. The truth screamed like a child in a hospital room, and nobody listened. Yet, silence. That's how the next day started. Not the kind of silence that wraps around you with the scent of fresh brewed coffee and the smooth hum of Al Green spinning on vinyl. No, not that kind. This was the kind of silence that creeps down hospital walls like mildew, quiet, calculated, and crawling with suspicion. It's the kind of silence that doesn't need to say a word, because the message is already clear. You've been written off. Dr. James Lawson walked into the clinic like a ghost. Not the spooky kind that rattles chains, but the kind people pretend not to see. Colleagues he'd shared night shifts with, the ones he'd stood beside during emergencies that pushed them all to their limits, they wouldn't meet his eyes. One guy mumbled "morning" without lifting his gaze from his monitor, like James had suddenly become just another shadow passing through. Message received, he thought, moving past rows of coffee mugs and those gutless half-smiles that only show up when people are too polite to say what they're really thinking. When he reached his office, he didn't even have to turn the handle to know what was waiting. Empty. Not just the eerie kind of empty that comes after a long shift, but truly vacant. His files? Gone. His schedule? Scrubbed. Only thing left was a neatly folded letter from legal. "Your responsibilities have been temporarily reassigned. Please contact Ms. Hooland with any questions." Of course. Ms. Hooland, the clinic's legal whisperer, late 40s, blonde, heels that echoed through hallways like subpoenas. Her smile was the kind you could cut your finger on. Sharp, professional, and designed to protect them. Not you. She was the kind of woman who didn't raise her voice because she never had to. She had contracts, statutes, and a polished indifference sharper than any scalpel. He met her at the exact time stated. She didn't ask him to sit, not out of rudeness, but because she already knew. He needed this meeting more than she did. People like her always understood the weight of power and how to wear it like armor. "Dr. Lawson," she began, not looking up from her tablet, "according to the complaint, you breached the emotional boundary of a patient and caused psychological distress to a minor." James blinked slowly. He wasn't surprised. Disappointed? Sure, but surprised, not in the least. "Are you serious right now?" he asked, leaning back, his hands calm but his voice layered with disbelief. "I'm a surgeon, not a cartoon villain. I didn't touch the child. I touched the shoulder of her father. My patient, the one I pulled back from death with my bare hands in training. Sorry if I didn't pause to ask a 7-year-old for permission to do my job." Hooland didn't flinch, not even a blink. If there was a soul in there, it had long since been redacted by corporate policy. "You have to understand," she said, voice smooth as glass, "this clinic services high-profile families. Any incident, even perceived, that compromises the emotional safety of our patients or their relatives can cost you donors," he cut in, smiling bitterly. "Right. And here I was thinking we were in the business of saving lives." She let the sarcasm slide off her like a well-pressed blazer. Until the matter is resolved, you are restricted from any contact with the Walsh family. You've been temporarily reassigned to the education department. Your first obligation is a lecture for the incoming interns. A lecture. Perfect. From world-class surgeon to chalkboard babysitter. Next stop, handing out juice boxes and coloring sheets. He left the meeting room not defeated, but burning with that low, slow flame known only to those who've spent a lifetime overqualified and still disrespected. As he walked through the corridors, the noise changed. Not louder, but tighter. Whispered phrases behind hands. Looks tossed over shoulders like dirty laundry. No one said a thing out loud, of course not. This wasn't the Jim Crow South. It was 2025. Politeness was the new prejudice. But James heard them anyway. Not the words, but the intention behind the silence. The classroom wasn't big. Maybe 20 students. Half of them were clearly kids of privilege. Just enough confidence to think they already knew it all. Just enough ignorance not to realize they didn't. Only one black student sat in the back, quiet, shoulders pulled in, head lowered like he'd been trained from birth to take up as little space as possible. James stepped to the front, chalk in hand, stared at the board, and then set the chalk down. He turned and faced them, full on. "I was supposed to talk to you today about vascular surgery," he said, "about arteries and clamps and what to do when a brain decides to bleed on its own terms. But that's not what you need to hear." He pointed to his head. "You need to understand this," he said. "And this," placing a hand over his chest. "Because if you can't operate with this," he tapped both again, "you'll never be anything more than a set of hands with a license." Silence. He walked toward the center of the room. "I saved a man's life yesterday. His daughter screamed when she saw me. Not because I harmed her. Not because I even touched her. Because I was there. Because I was me. And in her world, that was enough to be scared." A white student up front raised his hand. The kind with too much confidence and not enough experience. Jaw square. Eyes steady. Voice too sure of itself. "Maybe she was just startled?" James smiled, not kindly. "She was startled, all right. Startled by my presence, my face, my color, not my actions. And here's what you need to understand. That reaction, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from everything she's ever seen, heard, been taught. Intentionally or not." He paused. "Let the weight settle. That's something you will probably never experience. But I experience it every day. Every time I walk into a room, every time I offer help, I carry a resume longer than this hallway, and I still get treated like the threat." The classroom was dead quiet now. Even the privileged kids started shifting in their seats, unsure where to look. But that black student in the back, he looked up, locked eyes with James. For the first time. "You want to be doctors?" James said, taking a step forward. "Then learn to see people. All of them. Even the ones who don't look like your family. Learn to speak up when the system tilts the floor against someone. Otherwise, you're not healing, you're enabling." He walked out without another word. No applause, just silence. But that one student, the one in the back, caught up with him in the hallway. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I thought I was the only one who felt that." James nodded. No speech, no performance. Just two people sharing the same truth. One already in the fire, one just now stepping into it. Later that night, he sat alone in the residence lounge, flipping through charts he no longer had permission to sign. Then, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Dr. Lawson?" A woman's voice, familiar, strained. "Yes, this is Ellen Walsh, Lily's mother." He froze. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. "We would like to meet, if that's okay." He exhaled, long, slow. "And you're sure she won't scream again?" There was a pause. "Number, I'm sure she's starting to understand where that scream came from." They met in a visitor's room on the first floor, the kind of sterile, artificial comfort space that hospitals design to convince people that pain is manageable. Behind the glass walls, everything looked composed, neutral. But the air between them was loaded, like the heavy sky just before a thunderstorm. The furniture was bland, the lighting too polite, and the silence between them was already saying things that words were too late to catch up to. Ellen Walsh walked in alone. No daughter, no husband, no lawyers or clinic administrators to shield her with procedural armor. Just her, wrapped in a long gray cardigan that made her look smaller than she probably felt. Her face written over with a night of sleepless reckoning. And something else. Something almost resembling shame. James Lawson didn't rise when she entered. Didn't offer a handshake or smile. He wasn't angry anymore. Not in the traditional sense. It was a deeper thing now. Past anger, past resentment. It was the kind of still pain that settles in the bones when you've been here before. Too many times to count, and still no one sees you for what you really are. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said finally, her voice careful, like she was walking barefoot across broken glass. You invited me, James replied, eyes level. So, I assume we're at the apology part of the play? Or is this still part of the performance? Her fingers tightened in her lap, a nervous tick or just something to hold on to when truth starts cutting deep. She didn't meet his gaze at first, but then she lifted her eyes. Steady now. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness, she said. I came to admit the truth about myself, about my daughter, about how we live inside illusions. Safe, comfortable illusions. Until something breaks through and we're forced to face what we've allowed to grow. He let out a quiet, bitter laugh. And I'm the thing that broke your illusion? He said. The monster that cracked the picture-perfect snow globe? No, she answered quickly. You were the mirror. My daughter didn't scream because of you. She screamed because of what she was taught, quietly, unconsciously, by the world around her, by me. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the rain tapped at the glass with a soft, persistent rhythm. It slid down in slow trails, like even the sky had tears to spare for the absurd tragedy of what people called progress. You know, he said, not turning back, I've met your type before. Polite, educated, righteous in theory. You say all the right things about fairness and equality. But when the system's weight shifts and drops right into your lap, when it's no longer a concept but a confrontation, you go silent. Or you call a meeting, like this. She didn't interrupt. She let him speak, which already made her different than most. I stood there, he said, finally turning to her, with hands that have held the insides of hearts, literal hearts. I held your husband's, in a sense, and yet your daughter screamed. Not because I hurt her, but because I existed in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong skin. And that's exactly why I'm here, Ellen said, her voice barely above a whisper. Because last night, my daughter cried. But not out of fear, out of shame. She asked me why she screamed. She said, he didn't do anything wrong. And I didn't have an answer. Because deep down, I knew. I'd been afraid too. Not of you, but of what your presence forced me to confront. For the first time since the day before, James looked at her. Not like a threat, not like a barrier, but like a woman broken by truth. Not all walls collapse with earthquakes. Some crack under the quiet weight of a child's question. So now what? He asked. You want to feel better? Have your I listened and I learned moment? Invite me to dinner with the family? She shook her head slowly. I want you to come back to the room, she said. Not for me, for her, for Lily. She needs to say what she couldn't say yesterday. She needs to see that fear isn't a crime, but ignoring it is. He didn't answer immediately, but something shifted in his chest. Not forgiveness, not closure, something else. A recognition that if he walked away now, that little girl might carry that fear into adulthood, like an invisible scar carved by silence. When he entered the room again, everything felt different. It wasn't about the machines anymore, or the clinical beeps that marked time like a metronome. The room was warmer, softer. On the windowsill was a child's drawing. Stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. One wore a white coat. The words at the bottom were uneven, like the hand that wrote them was still learning how to spell. Dr. J. Lily sat by the bedside, small hands clutching a worn teddy bear. When she saw him, her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move away. She didn't hide. Her eyes found his. Hi, she said, barely audible. I'm sorry, I was scared. Not because you were bad, but because I didn't know. I didn't understand. James crouched to her level, gave her the kind of smile that only comes when you've climbed out of the fire still holding your dignity. Fear is part of life, he said gently. The question is, what do you do with it? She nodded, slowly. And then, with the pure, unfiltered courage that only a child can muster, she threw her arms around him. It wasn't performative. It wasn't scripted. It was human, raw, healing. And for James, it was something more powerful than any headline, any apology from a boardroom, any hollow recognition from a podium. This was victory, not a loud one. Not the kind people clap for, but the kind that rewrites futures. Outside the room, behind the glass, 3 men stood watching. One wore the badge of the clinic's communications office. Another, the expensive suit of a board chair. The last one, the director himself. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Their faces said it all. Shock, realization, and something close to reverence. We saw everything, the director finally said. There's a camera in the room. This can't be ignored. We need to go public, added the chairman. Not because of damage control, but because if we stay quiet, we become complicit. James raised an eyebrow, arms still around Lily. So, a public apology now? Yes, the director said without hesitation. To the whole country. And for once, James believed them. Because in that moment, in that room, he was no longer a question mark. He was the answer. Later at a press briefing, the director stepped up to the mic and read from a statement that didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded earned. Dr. Lawson was unjustly removed from his duties. We offer a formal apology. But more than that, we are implementing new standards. Real standards. Training, transparency, accountability. But that wasn't the real apology. That came hours later. In the clinic hallway, Lily found him again. She handed him a new drawing. It was 3 figures. A man in a hospital bed, a little girl, and a man in a white coat holding both their hands. Below it, "Thank you for not being afraid of my fear." He smiled, not because it was over, but because it was finally beginning. The morning didn't announce itself. It dragged in, heavy and slow, the kind of gray that clings to your bones and makes the whole city look like it just gave up. The sky was smeared with clouds like dirty laundry, and the streets shimmered under a thin, reluctant rain. Cars crawled forward, wrapped in mist, while people moved like shadows under their umbrellas, clutching coffee cups like shields, their coats pulled tight not just against the cold, but against the world. Dr. James Lawson woke up before the alarm, not because he was rested. Rest was a foreign language at this point. He sat at the edge of his bed in the half-light of dawn, rubbed his face and let the silence breathe around him. Sleep had been a losing game. How could anyone sleep with a fire still burning in their chest? Yesterday had clawed its way into his soul and pitched a tent. A little girl crying in his arms. A mother seeing herself for the first time without the filter of polite society. A system exposed for what it had always been. A house built on silence, suddenly rattled by truth. He didn't walk into the hospital like a man returning to work. He walked in like someone who had been declared unnecessary and proved otherwise. Not a martyr, not a miracle, just someone the system tried to swallow and choked on. At the front desk, the young woman who used to call him Doctor. Lawson, with that slight upward lilt, like she was always just a hair's breadth away from saying, Mr. instead, didn't lift her eyes this time, didn't smirk, didn't summon the usual cheerfully veiled distance. She just murmured, "Good morning, Doctor." Lawson. There it was, the shift, the ripple. Not a tidal wave, but something had moved. He walked the corridor. The same corridor where, a week ago, people had avoided eye contact like his presence was contagious. Now they peeked out from break rooms and behind half-open doors, watching, measuring. Was he really back? Yes, he was. And not to apologize, not to retreat, but to mark the ground. In the main conference room, every seat was taken. The director sat at the head of the table, face set in the kind of expression people wear when they've been told it's time to listen, not talk. Beside him, the board members, legal counsel, PR staff, and of course Miss Howland, her ever-present tablet balanced on her knee. Only today, the confident, calculated sharpness of her expression had been replaced with something closer to restraint. Like she knew a storm was about to pass through, and she wasn't quite dressed for the weather. "Dr. Lawson," the director began, carefully choosing each word like it was on trial, "we want to officially welcome you back. You are fully reinstated with all privileges. And, additionally, Lawson raised a hand. No drama, no anger, just calm control. "I don't need reinstatement," he said, "because I never left. You may have lost your sense of direction, but I never lost mine. My name stayed right where it always was, on the door, on the credentials, and on the records of every life I've ever saved." Silence followed, but not the kind that comes from respect, the kind that settles in when truth makes itself undeniable. "And since we're being honest," he continued, stepping forward just slightly, "let's address what happened. You removed me from surgery. You labeled me a liability, all because a child screamed. But not one of you paused to ask, what was she really screaming about?" They didn't answer, so he did. "She wasn't afraid of what I did. She was afraid of what I looked like doing it. That's the truth none of you wanted to say out loud, that you weren't protecting her. You were protecting your image, your donors, your comfort. You saw a black man beside a white man in a hospital bed, and you flinched. Not out loud, but in every decision that followed." The director cleared his throat. Miss Howland stared at her screen. "But here's the thing," Lawson said, reaching into his bag and pulling out a small tablet. "The room had a camera. Everything was recorded. Her scream. My response. The reality you pretended didn't exist. It's all here. He placed the tablet on the table. I want this shown to every medical student that passes through this clinic as part of the curriculum. Not to teach surgery, to teach humanity. And if you're not willing to do that, I will. I'll release it myself and let the country see what fear looks like when it hides behind white coats and polished ethics. No one challenged him, not this time. An hour later, the hospital held a press conference. It was the full production, polished statements, flashing cameras, tight-lipped apologies. The director took the mic, eyes rehearsed, but voice a little raw at the edges. We made a mistake. We failed to support one of our own. We thank Dr. Lawson for his resilience and his courage. Starting today, we are launching mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. We are not just saying we believe in equity. We are beginning the work to live it. It was clean, strategic, necessary. But the real moment, the one that mattered, that came later. Lawson was walking the corridor near pediatrics when he saw her. Lily, standing beside her mother, holding something clutched to her chest. A drawing, paper slightly bent from too many foldings. She walked up to him, quiet, focused. Still young, but different now, changed. This is for you, she said. I drew us. You, me, and Daddy, holding hands. He unfolded the paper. Crayon figures. Simple, bright. 3 people, linked at the center. A sun overhead, a hospital behind them. Below it, in uneven handwriting, thank you for not leaving. And that's when he smiled. Not the guarded smile of survival, not the polite mask he'd worn too long, but a real one. Deep, quiet, rooted in something bigger than victory. Bigger than him. You're braver than you know, Lily, he said. And you just helped change a piece of the world. He stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The clouds were clearing. The city stretched ahead, familiar but new. His coat was still damp, but his back was straight. He wasn't just walking out of a hospital. He was walking into history on his own terms.